Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, and welcome all you porcupines. This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project in the Live Free or Die state of New Hampshire, Eric Brakey. Thank you for joining us today for episode 60 of the Porcupine Report. As you know, if you are regularly watching the show, we come to you with a new episode every single Wednesday, with a few exceptions here or there. You know, things happen. But every single Wednesday, we are bringing you something at 7 o'clock p.m. on the Free State Project social media pages, on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, and we're even up on Spotify. So be sure to follow the Free State Project on your favorite social media platforms. And if you are listening to this on your favorite podcasting app, then be sure to subscribe so that you get those notifications every time we come out with a new episode. I'm really pleased week to week to see that our audience is growing. I'm getting more and more feedback, and 60 episodes in, I like where we are. I do want to, before we get into our conversation for today, I want to note a few things. First, this week was a very important anniversary for all who love freedom in the state of New Hampshire. On April 14th, so that was on Monday, was the anniversary, the 253rd anniversary of the Pine Tree Riot. Now, when we talk about the history leading up to the American Revolution, there's a lot of events that get a lot of attention in the history books. We all know about the Boston Tea Party and a lot of the things. For some reason, we hear a lot about stuff that happened in Massachusetts. I don't know. I think maybe they wrote the history books. But 17 months before the Boston Tea Party was the Pine Tree Riot in Ware, New Hampshire, where the King of England had proclaimed that all of the pine trees in New England belonged to him exclusively for the purposes of building up the British Navy. And that any person in New Hampshire or otherwise who cut down the king's pine trees would be seriously punished. Well, in Ware, New Hampshire, the people decided that they weren't having it anymore, and they fought back, rallying around an individual named Ebenezer Mudgett. They fought back. They had the Pine Tree Riot, which was one of the very first brush fires of what became the American Revolution. And of course, in New Hampshire, to this very day, we take freedom very seriously. We are the #1 state for freedom in America. We have the right to revolution in our state constitution, and our state motto declares proudly what we believe in: live free or die. So the Pine Tree Riot, 253 years ago today, as we are on our march to the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which I guess formally kicked off the American Revolution. That'll be next year. And yet 3 years ahead of time, the folks of New Hampshire were already lighting those brush fires of liberty. So to all patriots in New Hampshire, happy anniversary of the Pine Tree Riot. And of course, you know, irony of ironies, I don't know how this worked out historically, but like literally the day after the anniversary of the Pine Tree Riot is tax day. As we're recording this, it is tax day. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly getting raked over the coals by the Imperial City, who want to take a huge chunk of all of our incomes to fund their wars and surveillance state and all of their unconstitutional programs. You know, it's always so funny to me that we have these magic words like taxation, right? What is taxes exactly, right? We if you or I were to go to our neighbor and stick a gun in their face and say, give me a quarter of your income or I'm going to lock you in a cage, what would we call that? We'd call that stealing. We'd call that extortion. But for some reason, when it's the government doing it, we call it taxes. Just like when the government commits mass murder, we call it war. Or when the government commits slavery, we call it conscription. there are these magic words that they like to use to disguise the real nature of what exactly they're doing. And here in the free state of New Hampshire, we don't believe in those magic words. We don't believe that the government has any special authorities from if I don't have the power to do it, how can a government of our representatives and our delegates, how could they have how could we delegate to them a power that we ourselves do not have? So that's why in New Hampshire, we continue to fight to reduce and abolish all forms of taxation, all forms of illegal infringements on our natural rights. So happy tax day, or very unhappy tax day. And I hope that we keep the spirit of the Pine Tree Riot alive as we go forward and continue to work to combat this unconstitutional federal government that we live under. And I also want to note, of course, we have major events coming up. The New Hampshire Liberty Forum is very, very close now. It's hard to believe how close we're it's going to be next week. So if you haven't gotten your tickets for the New Hampshire Liberty Forum yet, you're going to want to act quickly. We've sold over 200 tickets now. Anyway, it's going to be a very, very packed event. You're going to want to get your tickets in case they sell out. And of course, we got great speakers coming. I'm very excited to hear from Jeff Deist, who's going to be our keynote speaker for our Saturday VIP dinner. But we've got so many great speakers coming. I'm also excited to hear from Frank Edelblue, the New Hampshire Commissioner of Education, has been leading the way on education freedom accounts for school choice policy. I'm looking forward to hearing from Sergeant Dan McKnight, the national leader of the Defend the Guard movement. I'm looking forward to hearing from Angela McCardle about ideas on libertarian strategy to achieve liberty for real, and so many others. You can get your tickets and learn all about the speakers who are coming out, the events that are taking place, including a Soho Forum debate between myself and Andrew Heaton. You can find all that at nhlibertyforum.com. And as a special gift from me, use discount code Granite Gulch for 10% off your tickets. So act quick. That's going to be April 24th through the 27th, coming up very soon. And by the way, that discount code Granite Gulch also works to get you 10% off your PorcFest tickets. And PorcFest will be here before you know it too. June 16th through the 22nd, taste the revolution. Come out and get a little taste of the freedom and liberty revolution that's being built in New Hampshire at Rogers Campgrounds in Lancaster. A lot of great speakers coming out. Too many to name. I've already been going on for long enough already, and we haven't even gotten to our guest for today. So porcfest.com is the site. Pork with a C, not a K. Get your tickets. And speaking of our guest today, he, in fact, will be joining us at PorcFest this year. I'm looking forward to having him. And, I've known our guest for today for a number of years. We've worked together on sound money policy when I was serving as a state senator in Maine. And he is doing work on sound money policy in state legislatures all around the country. His name is JP Cortez. He is the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. I had the great pleasure of bumping into him, actually being on a panel with him recently alongside Jack Hunter, who was our guest last week at the Atlanta Young Americans for Liberty Conference, where we were talking about the legacy of Dr. Ron Paul. And we're going to talk, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today. We'll talk a lot about sound money and maybe what he's looking forward to at PorcFest. Let's welcome to the show, JP Cortez.
Hey, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Hey, JP. Well, really glad to have you on. I guess first, I got to ask you, JP, have you had many opportunities to visit New Hampshire?
I have visited New Hampshire. It is a beautiful state. I would love for an excuse to go back, and I'm happy to have one this summer.
All right. Have you ever been to PorcFest, or will this be your first time?
This will be my first one. PorcFest is kind of a legendary event in these circles. I was running around the Mises Institute in the mid 2010s. And even back then, you were hearing about this event taking place in New Hampshire every year where people camp out, they set up tents, and they talk about liberty. And it's an agorist sort of event where people are talking about actually involving trade and finding ways to work around the state in a very interpersonal way. So I am excited to go. I've heard stories and I can't wait to have some of my own.
Well, we're glad to have you. We're running some ad campaigns for it right now, highlighting, are you even a real libertarian if you've never been to PorcFest? So it's such a rite of passage now, JP. I'm glad you get to become a real libertarian by coming to PorcFest this summer.
Thank you very much for having me. You're right. These are libertarian bona fides that I probably should have. I am failing by not having. I don't know what I'm doing.
As you travel the country working on sound money legislation, I don't know how anyone takes you seriously if you haven't been to PorcFest.
Exactly.
Well, anyway, we're looking forward to welcoming you, JP. And, as I alluded to, you and I bumped into each other recently. We were on a panel at the Young Americans for Liberty conference in Atlanta. And we were talking about the legacy of Dr. Ron Paul. And JP, I'll say, I didn't even really realize just how long you had been in the Liberty movement. I mean, I came to know you. I think I heard you on the Tom Woods show at one point, reached out about sound money legislation we could do in Maine. Maine was a bit of a tough nut to crack, as you and I know, on that, with Democrats running things there. But well, I guess let's start with kind of the legacy of Ron Paul, and then we can move into talking about some of the work you're doing on sound money policy around the country. What are some things you remember about kind of the panel discussion that we did, and what are some of your thoughts on the legacy of Dr. Ron Paul now that he's turning 90 years old this year?
That is incredible. 90 of maybe the best years that any American has ever had. My story is not a lot. It's not a very original story, if I'm being honest. Much like the story of many others, it starts with Ron Paul. For me personally, I was a pretty politically agnostic high schooler that was randomly assigned a politician that I had to study in my AP government class. And completely by chance, I just happened to have been assigned Dr. Ron Paul. And it was then just through the coursework assignment that I fell into this rabbit hole where I started reading about inflation and sound money and liberty and freedom. And from there, that takes you to the Mises Institute. And I got my degree from Auburn University, which is right across the street from Auburn's campus is right across the street from the Institute. So I found myself there all the time. I was paying, quote unquote, to get a degree. And I found myself actively skipping those classes and leaving those environments to go spend time at the Institute with the professors, with the economists there. And so that's where I got my education. And it was coming out there. I graduated in 2015 with my degree. And the Sound Money Defense League had already been established. It had a website. It was started by the president of Money Metals Exchange, which is a national bullion dealer, who had a background in public policy. He was the former vice president at National Right to Work. So he had a policy background. He intuitively understood freedom, and he was looking around at this precious metal space, realizing, wait, there's a lot of policy that is restrictive, that introduces disincentives to people constitutionally abiding by what money should be. And so that was 2014, the advent of the league. And so it's been almost a dozen years now. But all of it, started from Ron Paul, and all of it is shaped in the image of what Ron Paul understood, which is the importance of sound money. Dr. Paul understood that the fraud that is the Federal Reserve note, the fraud that is America's money, is the fraud that enables all of the other fraud. America's propensity and capacity to fight endless wars around the world, wars of choice, that is a function of being able to fund endless wars around the world. The America's bloating government and bureaucracy, that happens because they have this printing press. Without it, they wouldn't be able to do these things. And Dr. Paul, I think, realized more than most, and certainly earlier than most, that this is a restriction on government that needs to take place, because those in charge have shown that they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. They've done absolutely nothing to show that they have the desire or the will or even the capacity to restrain themselves and restrain their spending. So all of this, it boils down to the Austrian ideas of Mises, Hayek, Rothbard, and obviously Dr. Paul's championing of these ideas obviously influenced me and kind of got the ball rolling on the Sound Money Defense League. But, all across the country and on so many other issues, Dr. Paul showed us a ton of things. One, I think as far as it pertains to our strategy, maybe the most important thing that Dr. Paul showed us is the power of grassroots. More important than someone putting a fancy suit on, more important than going and making these arguments is the ability to have a movement that percolates at the local level, right? Eric, you know better than anyone. At the state legislative level, they aren't really prepared to receive organized campaigns. Maybe in Washington, D.C., the aides there get hundreds of calls a day, emails a day. They might take your message down and pass it on to the congressman. You might get a form response back. But on the state level, in places like Nashville, Tennessee, or in places like Lincoln, Nebraska, or Salem, Oregon, those are the places where individuals still have power. And so calling 10, 15, 20 emails, 20 phone calls to a state legislature makes all the difference in the world. So tactically, it makes a lot of sense to invest and to really find a way to leverage the grassroots, because that's something that Dr. Paul told us. It's more than any individual person. You can make waves, you can make change through movements, through community. I think another super important point that Dr. Paul told us, and actually this is an interesting point that you brought up, and it has resonated with me since you said it, is that the importance of being polished, the importance of being able to communicate and level with people where they're at. Libertarians often get a bad rap for, either being covered in tattoos or piercings or reeking of marijuana or whatever it is. And kind of the importance of being able to walk into any room and speak to anyone about liberty and its importance and how it impacts every single one of us. On the sound money level, all of us use the dollar. None of us woke up and said, I'm going to choose the US dollar. This is the type of money that I want to use. We're trapped. There are no other options that aren't impeded with taxes or regulations. So in this system that we're all trapped in, we have to find ways to work around, to subvert. That's Hayekian. F.A. Hayek talked about how money was frozen. The government they claimed the monopoly on money, and then it was frozen in its most primitive state. But what if money doesn't have to be what we imagine it to be today? What if the constitutional conception of money, one that was governed by honest weights and measures, not by whims of expedient politicians, what if, given the choice, we found that people would prefer to choose a money that holds its value rather than one that's politicized? All of these, of course, are the insights of Dr. Paul. And so over and over again, you can see, as it pertains to the Sound Money Defense League, as it pertains, you mentioned earlier, Defend the Guard, as it pertains to so many other of these issues, Dr. Paul led on this. And I think he taught us too that, and maybe this is just a general principle in the liberty movement, good policy percolates upward. We shouldn't expect federal politicians to lead. These people are sent to DC, but they do not lead. What ends up happening, what we're better off, in my personal opinion, strategically, is building a powerhouse of states, bringing change within at the state level, and then forcing the federal government to recognize, wait, so many states are adopting these policies. We need to look at this too.
Yeah, there's a lot to respond to there, JP.
Sorry, Eric, I gave you a lot there. It's just that the panel was so great. There was so much to talk about.
Good. I hope that they release the video of that sometime. But I think you're absolutely right. Well, all right. Let me 10 different things I want to respond to at the same time. Well, first of all, let me say it is kind of amazing to think of kind of where we are now versus where kind of the conversations were about sound money 20 years ago. I mean, when when Dr. Paul would go up on the debate stage and talk about like gold, people, at least at least through the prism of kind of the corporate media, right? It's just like, who's this like crank gold bug going on about?
Kook.
Right? He's a kook. It's like, there's nothing wrong with the dollar. Nobody even knows what the Federal Reserve is. Why are you talking about this thing? Like, and it's fascinating. I mean, because of course that kind of just taking fiat money for granted that this is normal, which kind of had become kind of the popular wisdom. But of course, you go back 100 years and like monetary policy like dominated political kind of debates and elections. I mean, you go back to even just like the messages like in like the Wizard of Oz, right? Like so much of an allegory about kind of debates that were going on at that moment in time around monetary policy and what the politicians are doing to the money. So it does seem to me that we're in a much healthier place now. I think so much of the kind of the top-down imposed kind of central narratives have broken down over the last 20 years. And Dr. Paul's message was a big part of that, but also him being at the right place at the right time as the internet is and social media are emerging as these forces to combat kind of these centralized narratives. It's awesome to see kind of what's happened. And to your point, and I think this is certainly a point worth emphasizing, that as far as being politically effective in making change, you're right that, and I guess, I did mention it in the panel, right? We are not, if the goal is to create political change, we have to choose between, do we want to look like radicals or do we want to actually advance radical causes, right? If I were to show up at a state house public hearing reeking of cannabis with a long kind of hippie hair and dressed like Vladimir Zelensky rather than in a suit, right? People wouldn't take me seriously. They would dismiss me. And I remember learning this lesson years ago from a guy named Nick Spanos, who's like was a big he's still around. Now he's like pioneer of like the Bitcoin Center in New York City. But once upon a time, like 14 years ago or so, when I was working in the New York City Liberty kind of grassroots for supporting Ron Paul, he would always say, don't be a ragamuffin, right? If you want to be politically effective, cut your hair and put on a suit and like go and anyway, all right, I could go on about that. What do you make about why? Obviously there's a number of factors, and I've named some of them that I think, but why are people much more open today to serious policy conversations about sound money than they were at the turn of the millennium?
I think that we have a confluence of factors that have created this perfect moment in time. I think on a macro level, people are more open today than they were previously to question the experts. Like many other things, monetary policy has been relegated to the experts. You were talking earlier, if you go back to the William Jennings Bryan debate and, the Silver Cross and all of this, the bimetallic standard, this was the news of the day, and this is what people were discussing. Lay people were. These were the points on which they decided to whom to vote for. And today, that is very much not the case. Monetary policy and generally monetary understanding has escaped the layperson in America. So I think that's part of it. More than any time in recent history, at least in my 32 years of being alive, people are more open to openly questioning experts, quote unquote, especially government experts. More specifically, as it pertains to this issue, I think a lot of it has to do that people are tired of being gaslit, frankly. For a long time now, people have been told, and you can go back because it's almost comedic. At first there was no inflation. I'm talking about this recent.
And then it was transitory.
Exactly. First there was no inflation. And then there was transitory inflation. It'll pass. Worry not. And then it became, oh, wait, it may stick around. But actually, it's not the government's fault. Certainly, it is the fault of Russian oligarchs. And then people were like, oh, it's not the war in Ukraine. It's actually the fault of your local grocery store CEO. And so on and so forth. And it's a constant pivot. And the truth is, Americans, the American government, the people cooking these numbers, can no longer deny to the American people that are going to grocery stores, trying to buy groceries every week, that are trying to power their homes, that are trying to buy used cars or medicine, that their dollar is simply not going as far as it used to. And people are not blind to this. Mises has this great quote, and I think I mentioned it in the panel, that a judicious housewife is a better indicator of inflation rates than any of the cooked government numbers that these people are feeding us. So people are tired of being lied to. People go to the grocery store, and these economists are telling them, "Oh, the economy's great. Everything's fine. You just have a bad outlook." And people are tired of being terrorized and flogged for coming out and saying, "Wait, that's not the case. That's not my lived experience." And I think maybe lastly, or the third prong of why this has taken hold, without being too self-congratulatory, it's that before 2014, there was no organized movement on sound money at the state or federal level. In 2011, famously, Utah passed the first sound money bill, the Utah Legal Tender Act, they called it, in 2011. But that was one state passing something, and frankly, it didn't really do a lot. There weren't people lining up to pay taxes in gold in Utah at the time. But what we saw in 2014, at least when we came through, is we started giving attention to this movement at the state level. And what started it as that one bill in Utah became a movement now, so many years later, that I actually did the count the other day. Since 2014, since we've been working on this issue, we've got 30 bills, 30 successful projects pertaining to sound money that have passed into law or that have been defended against from enacting what would have been the enactment of bad policy. So 30 pieces of legislation now across the country. This is in dozens of states, in states that hadn't been considering this, in states that in many cases have never asked questions about what money is, why do we use it for, what is its function, where does it derive its value. Legislators don't think about these things. You know better than anyone else, really. And so to draw an attention to this flashlight, to make these arguments, because in most cases, I don't believe that legislators are bad people. I don't believe that legislators are also like trained MMTers, modern monetary theorists. I don't believe that they have that background. In many cases, they just simply don't know. Almost 8,000 elected state legislators in the United States, the majority of them have never even heard the term sound money. So on the state level, having an organized machine that's pointing and introducing these bills and creating news around these bills and ultimately leveraging our grassroots to get these bills passed has created a movement and has created an environment where, last year was our most legislatively successful year of our history, with more than 65 pieces of legislation pertaining to sound money introduced in the United States, where the Sound Money Defense League was the primary engine behind 7 bills that passed last year. That was building off of the 5 bills that we passed the year before, building off of the 4 bills that we'd passed the year before that. It's an incremental process, but we are undeniably winning. And so, now that people are maybe losing confidence in the dollar, people are saying, hey, wait, why isn't my dollar buying as much? They're looking for alternatives. Gold and silver are naturally alternatives. They're the only form of money mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. Madison, Franklin, Jefferson wrote tomes on the importance of sound money and the dangers of fiat money. Things like Bitcoin, those sort of movements, we're starting to reimagine a money that, hey, wait, what if money wasn't centralized? What if money was permissionless? And of course, these are all the Austrian insights that, of course, Ron Paul championed. But, this is Mises and Hayek and Rothbard that were talking about this decades before the innovation of sound money, the innovation of Bitcoin, decades before the legislative movement that we see today. So it is bringing to life these Austrian ideals that, in theory, we've talked about for a long time, about why it's important to have sound money and how it prevents war and how it could otherwise restrain a government. But we're actually seeing it now. And that's such an exciting time to be in this space, because it's not just states. There's a lot of talk about BRICS countries. There's talk about de-dollarization. But everything seems to be coalescing around sound money, whether you're an adversary or an ally. Gold and silver, Bitcoin, sound money, these tend to be the answers that people are trending towards.
Yeah, I want to circle back to a point that you were making about the experts, because this is certainly, I feel like right now there's a big conversation going on around expertise. What does it mean to be an expert? I don't know if you caught the recent Joe Rogan with Dave Smith and what's his name? The British,
that guy.
Who,
can I just say, I am very happy that Dave is on our side. That man is a force.
He is a great communicator.
Excellent communicator. Happy that he's on our side, because he's a great asset for us.
And I've never seen him lose a debate except for once. And I claim the title of having bested him. Well, anyway, about this was years ago. We were debating LP versus GOP as the better political strategy, and I think that he would agree with me now. But this point on expertise, this has always been a problem, right? It's not like that we should reject experts. It's just we should have an understanding that the experts who are put in front of us by the political and media establishment are curated experts, right? It's the old problem of what they call the court historian, right? When the king commissions a historian to write a history, there's going to be a certain slant because the king is paying for it, right? The king wants a narrative that benefits him and his prestige and his claim to his position and of power, right? And it's the same thing with court economists, right? When we reject someone like John Maynard Keynes, it's not a rejection of expertise. Like, we've got our own experts. I mean, you've named a lot of them: Mises, Rothbard, Hayek. I mean, these are experts that are far and away better than the experts, the court economists that are put in front of us, who are put there to push the agendas of the powerful. And it seems like only recently have we been able to get outside of these centrally controlled narratives where those particular experts are the ones we're only allowed to look at. And so that's exciting. So, and when, it was just amazing to watch kind of, this guy, I forget his name.
Douglas Murray.
That's right. To hear him kind of like, on the one hand, as a lay person with an opinion, certainly if you're not an expert, I guess your opinion can be discounted to some degree, unless you are well read and you've read experts that you yourself can cite, like Dave Smith and all of us should be able to. We should be able to, maybe I don't have a master's degree in Austrian economics, but if you can read Rothbard, if you can read Mises, if you can read Hayek, and you can digest and understand them and cite experts. All right, I'm going down a and
I think it's an important point about an important distinction between expertise and credentialism, and kind of a certain set of the right, I guess, at this point, since we're talking about the Joe Rogan podcast, very much likes to see that sort of credentialism, and that still is important to them. So the argument itself kind of is less important than whether it comes through the pre-approved avenues of Ivy League schools or whatever that may be. And ultimately, it's a tactic used to discard or not even to have to answer to the arguments being made.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about this particular kind of line of inquiry for a long time, but I do want to make sure we hit some other things. So, JP, as part of your work at the Sound Money Defense League, you are the author of the Sound Money Index, where states are ranked and rated based upon their sound. All right, there it is. Well, give us a kind of a broad overview of kind of the state of the states as for sound money these days, and in particular, I'm very curious to ask, how does New Hampshire rate, and also out of curiosity, how does the state of Maine rate?
Well, so we'll start at the Sound Money Index. So like I showed it right here, this is the 2025 Sound Money Index. This is a scorecard that we've been putting out since, I believe, 2017 that ranks all 50 states using a number of different criteria to determine which state has the most pro-sound money environments and which states offer the worst or the most anti-sound money environments. These are criteria such as whether or not a state charges sales tax on the purchase of gold and silver, whether it charges a capital gains tax on the sale of gold and silver, whether it general rates of taxation, whether it has high rates or low rates of taxation, whether it has reaffirmed gold and silver as legal tender, as money, as constitutionally prescribed in Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, whether it has established a bullion depository, whether it invests physical gold in its pension or reserved funds, so on and so forth. And so this has been a really interesting guide to look at over the last 7 or 8 years, and you can see which states have proactively taken steps to affirm gold and silver, to affirm sound money, and which states seem to be actively avoiding it like the plague. New Hampshire, you mentioned, and of course, being in the free state, you are not going to be surprised to learn that New Hampshire ranks towards the top of the index. They rank 4th currently on the index because they've eliminated these taxes on precious metals on both sides of the transaction. And that's an important part because taxes are the greatest impediment to being able to use gold and silver as money today. So like I mentioned earlier, no one chose the dollar, but the alternatives have been shackled with these taxes. In some states, when you go to buy precious metals, you're going to get hit with a sales tax. When you go to spend those precious metals to buy eggs or milk at the store, you're going to trigger a taxable event. So you're going to get charged on the buy side and the sell side. This friction, having to track your cost basis, having to report the gains at the end of the year, makes it unworkable as money. It's simply not feasible. So to remove these taxes, to remove this friction is literally the most impactful thing that we can do at the state level to allow people to begin transacting in gold and silver if they choose. So New Hampshire is obviously great on all of these things. They're also currently considering legislation to establish gold reserves. They're considering legislation to do a depository, which they've considered for a while. So unsurprisingly, I know that you didn't need me to tell you, but New Hampshire is one of these fantastic states on this issue. Flip to the other side of the coin, your former state.
I still love Maine, but it's a bittersweet relationship.
And Eric, I can't lie to you, Maine is one of my favorite states. And while we were running that legislation a couple of years ago, I would revel at the opportunity to go up to Maine. I love it out there. It's beautiful. The people are great. Unfortunately, the state's lawmakers are less good on the issue of sound money. You were there, so I don't know if this story needs to be retold, but
the audience doesn't know it, so go ahead.
A couple of years ago, Senator Brakey, and I don't before Senator Brakey was even, I think, elected to the legislature. Did you have a term as like a rep or a senator, and then you came out and then you went back?
So I had overall 3 terms in the Senate, but there was a break because I did 2 terms, 14 to 18. Then I left, ran for federal office twice, then came back to the state Senate for a final term.
Okay. I was working with in-state legislators in Maine. I guess that was during your break to end this tax on precious metals. And then you mentioned I joined Tom Woods on his show, and then you and I connected again. And we introduced this legislation that would remove sales tax on the purchase of precious metals. This was one of a couple of bills that you championed. None of them, unfortunately, passed. But
The sales tax one was the one that got the most legs.
And so we had several hearings. I was in Augusta several times testifying before the committee. One big drama led to the next, and ultimately the bill was defeated by one vote. Go ahead.
For a little bit of the drama, just so people understand it, like we actually got in the taxation committee, we got support for this bill from the Democratic House chairman and the Democratic Senate chairman because of so much grassroots support that came in. And I don't know, maybe I made good arguments. I think the grassroots support made the difference a lot more. But we had a strong bipartisan support for this bill because it was double taxation, right? When you buy a stock on Wall Street, you don't pay sales tax on it. You may pay capital gains. You pay capital gains when you sell it, but you don't pay sales tax on it. So we pointed out, like, this is one of the only things where you're being taxed when you buy it and when you sell it. You're paying sales tax and you're paying capital gains tax. And so we did get a strong report out of committee with strong Democratic support, and it passed in the House and the Senate, except that Democratic Party leaders, over the weekend, apparently whipped their members to flip their votes against it. And I don't even think it was because of the issue. I was told that they didn't want me to get a victory or something. It was like something personal. I don't know, but it was so underhanded and so unfortunate because Maine remains, and this is a period of high inflation. The people of Maine are some of the poorest in the country. It's one of the highest taxed and lowest paid places in the country, and people are watching their savings and their paychecks eroded, and the state is standing in their way of being able to protect their savings with something that retains value. So yeah, it was there was some shady politics going on there, if you ask me.
And additionally, this is an argument that's popular across the country. It's not like we were asking the state of Maine to do something that hadn't been done or tried or considered in other states. As it stands today, 46 states have ended this tax. Maine is one of the 4 remaining states that still charges this sales tax on the purchase of the metals. So yeah, we came in and made what I feel are very strong arguments. And it was backroom dealing that ultimately led that bill to be killed. And I think a great lesson that was a learning experience for me, because I personally had never really seen the power of politics and the hand of politics played so blatantly as it was in Maine. That was obviously a question of power. This was a personal thing, not any issue that came with the policy. But it's because of these fights, and it honestly, and I don't mean to sing your praises continuously, but Eric, so much of that has to do with the fact that we even came close, has so much to do with having a liberty-minded legislator that can make these strong arguments and can be a strong advocate for the legislature or for the legislation in question. I'm reminded of a bill that actually just, not the most recent bill that we passed last week, but a couple of weeks ago, we worked to enact a bill in Kentucky this same bill being considered in Maine that ends the sales tax on purchases of precious metals. Part of the reason that was able to work is because we had Representative TJ Roberts, who, as someone who has worked with legislators across the country and worked with both you and him, he is cut from your same cloth. These are people that have liberty roots, that fundamentally understand the arguments here, and that are able to be strong advocates for the legislation that they're promoting at the state level. So much of it, I think you mentioned the importance of the grassroots, and obviously that's huge. But having an effective advocate is important as well. And thank you. So thank you for doing that. And if and when Maine does ultimately pass this, hopefully this year, it'll be because of the foundation and the work that you laid in the years that you spent advocating for this issue.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think you're absolutely right that it is kind of like you need a couple ingredients to make it work. You do need, right. It's the real nature of politics, which we is taught by Young Americans for Liberty and other groups. In fact, to put a little plug in, if you've never heard the, this is for the audience, not you. I know you've been through this, JP. If you've never sat through a presentation on the real nature of politics, this is one of the most valuable things that you can do if you want to be politically effective. And we are having that at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum Friday morning. We have Young Americans for Liberty's parliamentarian coming. He's going to be teaching for an hour the real nature of politics, how the system works. It just doesn't work the way the people in power tell you that it works. And you need an inside champion who's going to, really fight for your bill. But you also need the outside grassroots leaders who are going to put pressure on the rest of the politicians from the outside in. So, yeah, so I think you're absolutely right there.
And that's kind of the things that have created the environments across the country that we're seeing today. So I mentioned taxes and, taxes being an important part of what we do. And they are certainly, but so many states now, I'm glad to say, have gone past the level. They have removed the taxes and now they're looking around saying, what's next? What else can we do? So in Wyoming earlier this year, we worked with legislators out there to pass a gold reserve. Wyoming established a $10 million physical gold reserve for their state, stored within their state, to de-dollarize, because they're looking at their state's investments. They're realizing that many of them have negative real rates of return. And they're saying, wait, why? And we don't own a single ounce of gold? This is so backwards. In many cases, it's because they statutorily can't. Treasurers and the boards, the state finance people can only invest in approved assets. And in many cases, physical gold at all, in many cases, even paper gold, is not among the list of approved assets. So going in and empowering state treasurers is something we've done to have Wyoming be the next state to establish this gold reserve. I was in Nashville last week testifying to hopefully make Tennessee the next state to establish a gold reserve. They're looking at about $60 million in physical gold there. And then Alabama recently passed its third sound money bill since 2018 that we've been working there, this time to reaffirm gold and silver as legal tender. It's a symbolic victory that tells people in the state that the state is not going to stand in their way if they choose to use constitutional money. This is functionally, there isn't a lot of effect there, but psychologically, what that can do to a society that's in the throes of questioning their money, I think could potentially have a big impact on people in Alabama saying, wait, I don't want to invest in the stock market casino, these tariffs, my portfolio is going down 20% day to day. Where can I put my money in a place that saves wealth? I can buy a house. That's what Americans have done for decades. But Eric, you made this argument, and I've stolen this argument from you, making it in front of the legislature years ago. The dream of home ownership has been closed in the face of so many Americans, and so many Americans used to use home ownership as a vehicle for savings. And that avenue is completely unavailable now. So what's left? Real physical assets, gold and silver. That is the next available option. And so states should not be doing anything to impede a citizen's right and ability to save, use, buy, sell precious metals.
Yeah, two things I want to note on. First of all, I remember, when I sponsored the Treasury bill in Maine, and it was just so fascinating to present this bill to say, hey, let's give the state treasurer the option to hold some of our reserves in gold and silver, and made the case for the stability and history and all of that. And the funniest thing in the world was to watch the Democrat state treasurer come in and testify against the bill, right? We weren't mandating that he had to do it. We were literally saying, hey, we want to give you more options that you could completely disregard. And yet kind of the programming in the Democratic Party establishment against sound money is like, so he doesn't even want the option. So that was, that's a little humorous.
And Eric, the thing is, I wish I could say that this was a partisan issue, but even in Idaho, just like you mentioned, we passed a bill in Idaho doing exactly what you just mentioned. It was a permissive bill that gave the treasurer and the board of investors the permission to invest in gold and silver if they wanted to. There was no mandate to do this. The legislature, both the House and the Senate in Idaho, passed this bill, and the governor himself vetoed. The Republican governor of the state vetoed, saying, no, we don't want to give our treasurer the option to do this. So, you could make this a partisan issue if you wanted, but in my experience, that isn't the case, right? We have blue states. New Jersey, we just passed a bill in New Jersey without a single no vote through the entire legislature to remove taxes on gold and silver. New Jersey, it's one of the highest rates of tax incidence in the world, or excuse me, in the country. And alternatively, in states like Kentucky and Tennessee, these are states that are quote unquote red. We've struggled. It has taken multiple years of effort to pass legislation there. So, inflation or sound money, it doesn't have to be a partisan issue because inflation is harming, almost all of us equally.
I mean, I will say I'm on the one hand a little surprised about New Jersey, but then on the other hand, I'm not so surprised because their U.S. senators seem to recognize the value of gold and silver. That's how they want to take their bribe money in Washington, D.C. and in currency that'll actually retain its value.
It's weird how governments, fiat for thee, but not for me.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. And circle back to this other point, and I think it would be interesting to write a paper on it someday. But I wonder the degree to which, as we look at all of the different factors that are driving up housing prices in this country and the shortage of housing. I mean, obviously there's restrictions on housing supply and there's a number of different factors, but I wonder a lot too about this, of this impact of, it used to be if you wanted to save money for the future, you could just, when we had sound money, you could just save your money. You just put it aside and it increases in value over time. We had a deflationary monetary system, and I know the Keynesians think that's the worst thing in the world, and I think they're absolutely bonkers. But since we have moved towards inflationary money, you can't do that anymore. So the middle class increasingly looks at their home equity as the place to park their money. And it's not just the middle class. I mean, you have like oligarchs from around the world who just will come in and buy properties in the US, not to live there, but because they just are looking for places to park their money. So you'll have properties that are completely vacant. No one's living there, but it's just been purchased and being held onto in the anticipation that it's going to increase in value over time. And this seems to me, at least in part, a function of our fiat monetary system. And so I wonder if you were to remove all these barriers and allow people more easily be able to park their savings in sound money, in gold and silver, if that would have some mitigating effect on the artificial driving up of demand for housing that's not based on actual people wanting to live in housing. So anyway, that'll be a much, I don't know, maybe I'll have to write a Liberty Forum paper on this for next year.
I'd be interested in reading it. Yeah.
Okay, we are approaching the end of the hour, JP. I want to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you want to share with folks, and make sure to tell people where they can find you and follow your work.
I think just the importance of participating in your state legislature. I would encourage anyone listening to this now to understand that you do have power at the state level, and to the effect that you want to see policies rooted in liberty coming to fruition, you should be an active participant in your state legislature where you still have power. So that I'm happy to encourage everyone to do that. I think if you don't mind, I want to quickly say that, we've talked a lot about the dollar here, and there's a lot of talk about the global reserve currency and confidence in the dollar maybe shaking. One of the things and one of the reasons, one of the things that could mitigate some of this shaking of confidence would be to do something that the Sound Money Defense League has been advocating for more than a decade now, which would be to audit America's gold. There's been a lot of talk lately about auditing Fort Knox, Elon Musk, President Trump, Senator Paul, Senator Lee. All these people have jumped in the fray talking about auditing Fort Knox. And this, of course, as you may know, stemmed from Dr. Paul, who originally introduced a bill many decades ago that would audit Fort Knox and America's gold. We've been pushing legislation on this issue. We hope to have legislation introduced at the federal level on this issue soon, because it's not just Fort Knox, right? There are other places where America purportedly stores its gold holdings. And, a bar of gold can sit in the same place and change owners a dozen times. So who owns the gold? If it is indeed sitting in American vaults, Has it been swapped, leased, encumbered, and entangled in some other financial transaction? We need to have answers to these questions, and we've been working on federal legislation to hopefully get some clarity on that front, and hopefully we'll see movement and introduction on that bill here soon. But in general, Eric, thank you so much for having me. You can find our stuff at soundmoneydefense.org. You can find me on Twitter or X at JPCortez27, and you can find the Sound Money Defense League at Sound Money Def. You can also go to our site. My email address is on there. If you are in one of these states, if it's okay, Eric, I can send you the link to the Sound Money Index, and I encourage people to click through it. And if you're in one of those states that is towards the bottom of the index and you want to get involved, please, my email address, my phone number, I think, are on the website. Reach out. I'm happy to work with people in the state to make these Sound Money projects a reality and hopefully ultimately get them passed into law.
Awesome. And you can also find JP Cortez at PorcFest this June 16th through the 22nd. So, and if you are in one of those states with poor sound money laws, you can work to change it in your own state, or you can move to New Hampshire where we have great laws in place, and we're making them greater by the day. So thank you, JP. Really glad to have you on. And it was good to see you in Atlanta, and I'll look forward to seeing you in Lancaster.
Yeah, it's always nice to see you, buddy. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, JP. All right, everyone, that's the show. Again, I will remind you, get your tickets. The New Hampshire Liberty Forum is coming up in like a week and a half. It's hard to believe it's so close. I've been working and preparing and working with a great team of people to put this all together for you. So if you're going to not be there, well, you're going to miss out. So I hope that you are there. Please come and join us. We still have a few tickets left. NHLibertyForum.com. Get your tickets, and Granite Gulch is your discount code for 10% off. And then, of course, PorcFest. Get your tickets there as well. I also wanted to say, look, we're always talking about all the great events that are happening all the time in New Hampshire. We've got such thriving free state communities that the people are just putting on events almost every single day, which you can always find these events at our on our website, fsp.org, and check out the community calendar. Well, this past weekend, there was the 4th annual Libertarian Party versus Republican Party charity hockey game to benefit EdOpt. If you remember Jody Underwood, she was recently on the show. They are promoting information to families on the different educational options that are available for families here in New Hampshire. And I'm pleased to report that the Libertarians won the hockey game this year. Last year I attended. I remember the Republicans winning. But you know what the great thing is? While it's Republicans versus Libertarians, a lot of those Republicans are Libertarians and red jerseys, I will tell you. So that's a great thing about New Hampshire. Even the Republican Party is better here because there's a lot more Libertarians. But congratulations to the Libertarians on their victory at the hockey game. I think the final score was 7-4. So congratulations there. And to everyone else, I will see you at Liberty Forum, April 24th to the 27th. Come out, see you there. Thank you to our producer, Renita. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.